I think we're right. Oh, thank you. Oh, well, welcome back, everybody. Beautiful lunch. Some quite unedifying envy, I must say, displayed towards me because I'd actually had something extra during the morning, namely the chocolate souffle, but I pressed on and enjoyed lunch very much indeed. So welcome to this concurrent session, Effective Governance of Church Organisations, which is a tricky one. And I'm delighted to be introducing Sister Rosemarie Joyce CSB, a Brigidine sister whose early years in ministry were spent teaching in primary and secondary schools across Victoria, where she was principal of 4 secondary schools. She lectures in canon law at Yarra Theological Union and is an advisor on canonical issues. She's been the provincial leader of her congregation and is also a past president of Catholic Religious Australia, which, as you know, represents the congregations of women and men religious in Australia. She's a judge on the Marriage Tribunal for Victoria and Tasmania and a judge for the Appeal Tribunal for Australia and New Zealand, and also a member of the Canon Law Society of Australia and New Zealand, which I didn't know existed, Rosemarie. It's very interesting. Thank you. Today she's going to explore governance in church organisations, particularly educational institutions, governance in the context of mission and strategic objectives, organisational culture aligned with values and commitment by members, and those vital words: accountability, inclusiveness, transparency, subsidiarity and synodality. So if she can unlock all of that, we'll be really preparing her for sainthood. Please welcome Dr. Rosemarie Joyce.
Thanks, Geraldine. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you have all had a good start for your stay in Melbourne. We begin with an acknowledgement of land. As we gather at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre on the banks of the Birrong, we acknowledge the traditional owners of Naarm, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and to elders of all First Nation communities that are here today. As Geraldine has already said, in this presentation, I wish to concentrate on what I consider to be the most important factors relating to effective governance in church and faith-based organisations. Firstly, we will discuss what we mean by governance. This will be followed by the essential factors necessary for good governance in church organisations and what the current church law says about where the authority to govern comes from. A discussion of the importance of the culture which permeates an organisation will include the principles of accountability, inclusiveness and transparency. This will be followed by an outline of the principles of subsidiarity and synodality, which should be hallmarks of our Catholic organisations. And what do we mean by the word governance? Quite simply, governance refers to how and why we do things. More particularly, governance is the means by which an organisation is directed and controlled in pursuing its mission and strategic objectives. This means that for an effective governance, all in the organisation should have a clear knowledge of the mission of the organisation along with its strategic objectives. Effective governance is dependent on good leadership with clear accountability for all aspects of performance and behaviour. A commonly accepted definition of governance is the process by which organisations are directed, controlled and held to account. It encompasses authority, accountability, stewardship, leadership, direction and control exercised in the organisation. In simple terms, Good governance requires all to be working together for a common purpose, whether spiritual or secular. All are called to use their giftedness to achieve the purpose for which the organisation exists and has credibility. Governance has proved to be effective when leaders are accountable, inclusive and transparent in their approach. And conversely, it can be ineffective and even dysfunctional with leaders who are unaccountable and autocratic. Governance requires authority and a source for that authority. The authority to govern can come from a variety of sources. In a democratic society, the people vote to choose that authority. In a public corporation, this authority comes from the shareholders, and likewise, it comes from the members in an incorporated association. However, in the case of the Church, we hold that it comes from God. All authority in the Church exists to support the Church's mission, which is the mission of Jesus, and we hold that Jesus received that authority from the Father. And if we look at the words of Matthew, then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit." The light from the Southern Cross, which was the Catholic Church's response to the findings of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, gave a broad description of the principles of good governance for itself. And it said, within the Church, good governance will rest on clear structures and accountabilities, a commitment to ecclesial and civil governance principles, a supporting ethical culture, effective communication, right relationships, consequences for wrong actions, and good leadership. And importantly, it stated it places the essential dignity of each person at the centre of its deliberations. Let us not forget that the Royal Commission condemned the Catholic Church because of its poor and inadequate governance structures which allowed child sexual abuse to flourish. The findings of the Royal Commission were clear and unambiguous. The problem for the Catholic Church was not the issue of pedophilia, but its poor governance structures which allowed those guilty of pedophilia to remain in ministry and continue their abusive practices. Furthermore, the Church at that time promoted a culture of silence and clericalism, whereby bishops and religious leaders put their reputations and finances ahead of the safety and protection of children. In doing this, the leaders of the Catholic Church betrayed their mission to the people and to the world. This is an example of criminal and immoral governance. For Catholic organisations, good governance has a strong focus, which, as we have already mentioned, is the mission of Jesus. And what is this mission? Let us look at how Jesus, while referring back to the prophet Isaiah, described his mission, the purpose of his life. The Spirit of the Lord has been given to me, for he has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to captives, and to the blind new sight, to set the downtrodden free, to proclaim the Lord's year of favour. This too is our mission and the mission of all Catholic organisations. The sole reason for the existence of the Catholic organisation where you work, administer, the board you sit on, lies in the carrying out of this mission with the particular work ascribed to it. The mission of the Church is to encompass the whole gospel imperative, to take to heart and implement all the teachings of Jesus. This mission is greater than any CEO, principal, executive officer, teacher, or office assistant has the ability to implement. But it is possible when the whole entity knows its focus and works to achieve its aims. For any mission to be really successful, it is necessary that all know, understand, and are committed to its effective implementation so that it becomes a living reality. This is an important aspect of good governance. And we can ask, what do your protocols and policies say about your mission, and how often are they visited? Are they seriously discussed at board meetings, and if so, how often? What procedures have you in place so that the areas where your organisation may be falling short in carrying out this mission can be identified? The ways and manner in which your organisation carries out this mission of Jesus should be under constant review. Catholic institutions must be capable of adapting and changing in order to adequately respond to changing times. And for some entities, there can be a fine line balancing best practice while remaining a ministry of the Church. Let us look now at how the Catholic Church law describes governance and who in the Catholic Church is capable of exercising governance. We refer to Canon law, which states, "Those who are in sacred orders are, in accordance with the provisions of law, capable of the power of governance, which belongs to the Church by divine institution. This power is also called the power of jurisdiction. This canon, this law of the Church, makes it very clear that to have the power of governance in the Church, one must be a validly ordained Catholic deacon, priest, or bishop. We can justly question why Catholic Church law has linked governance with ordination, because by doing so, it is legalising discrimination, exclusion, and promoting clericalism. It is also an area where there is a divergence of views with regard to the application of law. Let us consider the situation today when almost all governance positions in Catholic organisations, whether they be in education, health, or social and community service, are governed by laity. How does this sit with Church law? We look to the second part of the canon for our answer. Lay members of Christ's faithful can cooperate in the exercise of this same power in accordance with the law. In other words, those of us who govern in the name of the Church, whether as a trustee for a ministerial public juridic person, the CEO or the managing director of a Catholic facility, or have some other responsible position, Church law says that a lay person is cooperating in the power of governance with the ordained. A lay person does not have this power in one's own person. However, as mentioned previously, this is difficult to rationalise today when many church organisations have no ordained person in their governance team. And if this is so, we ask, who is the CEO or managing director or principal cooperating with? Let us look at another church law which reminds us that by baptism all the faithful are called to participate in the triple munera. That is, all the baptised are called to participate in the teaching, sanctifying and governing power of the Church. And we read, Christ's faithful are those who, since they are incorporated into Christ through baptism, are constituted the people of God. For this reason, they participate in their own way in the priestly, prophetic and kingly office of Christ. This law of the Church states that a baptised person can participate in governance in one's own right, even though current church law still equates the power of governance with ordination. We look now to see what is entailed in the practice of good governance for Catholic organisations in the Catholic Church. And we look to the example of Jesus, who taught a particular way of governing, a way of love and humility. And in Mark we read, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognise as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. No, anyone who wants to become great among you must be your servant, and anyone who wants to be first among you must be slave to all." Jesus condemned hypocrisy. He endorsed openness and transparency. He rejected rules as ends in themselves, and he set the highest standards of governance for his times. And the principles and values he taught apply to our governance today. It is not necessary to send significant members overseas to absorb the culture and charism of the founder or foundress of your organisation, no matter how enriching it may be for them. But it is necessary that all staff know and have been touched by the life of Jesus, and that your practices and protocols are aligned with the gospel message, and that they are frequently revisited and evaluated against current practices. Jesus condemned the practices of the Pharisees, such as their excessive emphasis on the payment of tithes, while neglecting the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. What is the governance practice in your organisation where fees and costs are charged? Is there an overemphasis on the payment of these tithes to the detriment of the poor? Good governance does not support any practice where profit is put before the person. Research shows that, regrettably, Catholic schools today do not educate the very poor. You may know that they also do not educate the very rich, but the rich make that choice, whereas the poor have no choice. In their governance structures, what does your organisation say about those who cannot come to your organisation? The issue needs to be addressed where financial considerations determine who is not in our educational institutions. I'm going to turn now to the issue of culture. Culture has been described as how we do things and the way we do things when no one is looking. In other words, culture is the true face of the organisation. Culture calls us to be transparent, it calls us to be honest, it calls us to be true to what the organisation exists, and it calls us to be true to our own better selves. Such is a prerequisite for good governance. Culture permeates the whole of an organisation, and while it cannot always be expressed verbally, it can be felt. It cuts through words and mission statements, protocols and procedures. We often refer to culture as the behaviours, beliefs and values and how we act without thinking. Or, as Aristotle expressed it, we are what we repeatedly do. The culture of an organisation can be passed on from generation to generation, from one employer to the next, from employee to the next. Each leaves its mark, and each alters in some way this culture. In other words, the culture of an organisation is not static, because a school, college, health or social service facility is known to have a culture where all are accepted and valued. It still requires ongoing work and commitment for this organisation to maintain such a healthy culture. Satisfaction and smugness are the antithesis of good governance. To maintain a culture in an organisation where all feel valued, where all are respected, and where everyone's voice is heard, takes a commitment of energy and resources. It takes a continual evaluation of how we work and why we do the work we do. This is another example of good governance. The employment of staff who can identify with and make a positive contribution to the culture of the organisation is a primary duty, if not the primary duty, of the governing body. Indeed, it is a determining factor of good governance. For what reasons would this task, in the first instance, be given to another body, such as an external employment agency? Do you really receive dozens of applicants with degrees in theology and years of teaching and administrative experience applying for the top positions in the governance of your entity? Let me give you an example. During the lockdown in Melbourne, I was asked to be referee for an experienced teacher with excellent communication skills and pastoral sensitivity. She was seeking a position where her recent qualifications in theology could be utilised, and applied for the position of staff and student faith development in a nearby Catholic college. A plethora of questions, along with the criteria for the position, was emailed to her, and these were duly completed. A week later, the applicant had a Zoom interview with a representative from the employment agency. She thought it went well. 7 days later, and again in a Zoom interview, the applicant was asked if she would also consider doing some teaching in this role. She replied in the affirmative and waited to hear more. It was 3 weeks since the applicant lodged her application, and at no time did anyone involved in the governance of this college contact her. After waiting another couple of days, she withdrew her application and applied for a similar position in another college where she is working today. This is an example of poor governance by the college administrators, who were unable to recognise and then prioritise their governance obligations. So how do our governance protocols ensure that prospective employees who identify with our culture will be attracted to our organisation? Remember that there are such people out there, and our governing priorities should be foremost in our practices. We need to do the necessary work so that they will be attracted to our community. I'm going to talk now about the issue of inclusivity. Good and effective governance demands that we accept and appreciate all, and that there is no discrimination. Inclusivity should be the hallmark of our organisation. We need to know who are the people who are on the edges, who are made to feel not quite right, and who perhaps fear for their jobs and livelihoods. And there will be some. One such group today which face discrimination as a way of life are the LGBTQIA+ members. Where are they in our organisations? Do they feel they are in a safe place and are respected? And we ask, do we have a culture of acceptance of differences and acknowledgement that all are made equal in the eyes of God? The teachings of the Second Vatican Council remind us of our duty with regard to those who we perceive to be different. With respect to the fundamental rights of the person, every type of discrimination, whether social or cultural, whether based on sex, race, colour, social condition, language or religion, is to be overcome and eradicated as contrary to God's intent. Regrettably, the practice of the Catholic Church in this regard is one of contradiction in several areas, where it has a culture of active discrimination with regard to women, to those it perceives as being different, and to lay people generally. Let us not be part of this discrimination in our church agencies. Rather, let us aim to be inclusive of all, respectful of all, and appreciative of the differences we all bring to the table. I turn now to the principle of subsidiarity, which is critical for good governance. Subsidiarity requires that decisions are made by the people closest and most affected by the issues and concerns of the community. These are the people who should be listened to while ensuring that all local decisions are in accordance with organisational policy. As early as 1931, the Pope at the time, Pius XI, recognised the importance of subsidiarity, and in an encyclical he stated, "It is an injustice and at the same time a grave evil and disturbance of right order to assign to a greater and higher association what lesser and subordinate organisations can do." This principle was also taken up after the Second Vatican Council, when it was realised that the current canon law of the Church needed to be revised in the light of new understandings of the Church in the modern world. 10 guiding principles were listed to ensure harmony between Church law and the conciliar reform. The strong pastoral emphasis of the Vatican Council was to be recognised in the revised new law, and the principle of subsidiarity was listed as one of the 10 guiding principles. And this guiding principle was the principle of subsidiarity should be more broadly and completely applied to church legislation in order to strengthen the bond between those exercising authority and those subject to authority. While canon law must remain a unified system for the universal church, greater weight should be given to particular legislation, even at the national and regional levels, so that the unique characteristics of individual churches will become apparent. And we can ask, how is this principle incorporated in our organisation? No one appreciates the person who has to be in charge of everything and whose consent has to be given before actions are taken. Indeed, while the urge for power and enjoyment of having control and being important may be part of the human condition, the principle of subsidiarity calls for a communal effort and the delegation of authority. This was also clearly outlined by Pope Francis in Evangelicum Gaudium. The principle of subsidiarity enables all in the organisation to use their giftedness and to take responsibility at the level in which they are working, and thereby feel and know that they are making a positive contribution and that their expertise is valued. An organisation which uses the principle of subsidiarity in all its projects is Caritas Australia, and I notice they're on show outside. Caritas Australia works on the principle that all people have a right to participate in decisions that affect their lives, and subsidiarity requires that decisions are made by the people closest and most affected by the issues that are the concerns of their community. Because of this principle, Caritas works with local communities to support, promote and develop their capacity in decision-making so that they can better respond to their own needs. Caritas does not tell these peoples what they should or must do. This is good governance. And a final point, the principle and practice of synodality, which has been referred to quite often this morning. And we know that the practice of synodality should be central in the governance of a Catholic organisation. As Pope Francis has reminded us, synodality means walking together. Where synodality is practiced, everyone is respected, everyone's giftedness is acknowledged, everyone has something to contribute, and everyone is heard. And the institution practices inclusivity, is accountable, and is transparent. In his letter to the people of God, Pope Francis outlined what is meant by synodality, by this walking together. And he wrote, "It is impossible to think of a conversion in our activity as a church that does not include the active participation of all the members of God's people. Indeed, whenever we have tried to replace or silence or ignore or reduce the people of God to small elites, we end up creating communities, projects, theological approaches, spiritualities and structures without roots, without memory, without faces, without bodies, and ultimately without lives." This means that while confidentiality is respected and maintained, there are no hidden agendas or secrets, mindful that secrecy is the breeding ground for abuse. It means that it will be foreign for privileges to be bestowed on a few, and it will be foreign where those with status are sought out and where the ordinary are forgotten or, worse still, hidden. Synodality means accepting all so that all can respond to the call to mission. And not surprisingly, the recent Australian Plenary Council affirmed that governance in the Catholic Church should be exercised in a synodal manner with the appropriate participation of all the baptised. It committed the Church in Australia to fostering the discernment and synodal leadership envisaged at Vatican II and called for by Pope Francis. I'm going to refer now to the theme of this conference, which is "The Future is Listening," and I think I should have those students from St Clair's here. The future is listening, and the future is today. An organisation which listens is an organisation whose governance structures are respectful of all peoples, and that it knows it exists to serve all the people of God. And we conclude with the words of Pope Francis with regard to active listening to each other. We need to practice the art of listening, which is more than simply hearing. Listening in communication is an openness of heart which makes possible that closeness without which genuine spiritual encounter cannot occur. Listening helps us to find the right gesture and word, which shows that we are more than simply bystanders. Only through such respectful and compassionate listening can we enter on the paths of true growth and awaken a yearning for the Christian ideal, the desire to respond fully to God's love and to bring to fruition what He has sown in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosemary, and I have a little gift for you from Humble Beginnings commemorating.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you very much indeed. And just to be totally shallow, is it synodal or synodal?
Synodal.
Is it?
Oh, actually, I've heard others say the other two.
The Anglicans say synodal, and we tend to say synodal.
The ecumenical.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Rosemary. And look, in 10 minutes' time, I will have the In Conversation panel, which I'm looking forward to, with Professor Francis Campbell and Anthony Cleary, to explore the latest Vatican document on education, which is about the culture, the identity of the Catholic school for a culture of dialogue, which of course follows very much on from what Sister Rosemary was just saying. So, you know, have a 10-minute break to move between sessions, and I might see some of you back here. Thanks.